Welcome all to our December 15th Town Board meeting. I'd like to call this meeting in order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
My allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God,
Thank you. Tonight, the invocation will be given by Pastor Jamal Brown from the Holly Springs United Church of Christ. Pastor, welcome back. Good to see you. Do we still need a little love?
Even of that, good afternoon, well, excuse me.
Good evening, whatever.
Good evening, everyone. Well, we thank the Lord for allowing us to come and do the invitation, just in remembrance of this season, where we're coming up on many of the Christian faith, in which we believe God gave a gift. And despite even during that time, the differences that were going on, rich against poor, people of different backgrounds, Jews and Gentiles, God sent a gift. And the gift of his son, that whosoever, meaning his son, could draw everyone together, despite that be Democrat or Republican, despite if you're male or female, despite if you're black or white. He can draw everyone together. And because of him, because of that great sacrifice, before I do the invocation, we all covered under the same blood. And so with that in mind, as you all prepare to deal with the town business, God shared his love so much that he gave. So I ask that you would give of yourself in the same way the Father gave. Not because we deserve it, but because of who he is. So the same we should give to one another of service and of love. There's been enough bickering, hatred going on the last lifetime, the last few months. We ought to take on another platform of love. So with that, I pray. Father, thank you for who you are. Thank you that you've allowed us to get this far and to go through this season. Thank you, oh God, that you've allowed us to be able to deal with the business at hand. I pray right now for your spirit, your wisdom. And Lord, you said if anyone asks for wisdom in faith, you said you would give it liberally. We ask right now that they're becoming of the hearts and minds, Democrat, Republican, different zip codes in the room, that they come together for what's best in your name for Holly Springs. And Lord, we give you thanks. So we invite you in your presence into this space. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen, Pastor. Good words.
Thank you.
Item number 4, adjustment approval, December 15th, 2020 meeting agenda, Mayor Pro Tem.
I'll make a motion to accept the December 15, 2020 agenda with no changes.
Second. Motion made, second, all in favor.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Thank you. Public comment period. Again, we're due to current restrictions on mass gatherings. Public comment will be received in writing and delivered to the council members prior to this meeting. Madam Clerk, catch us up to date, please.
One comment requesting that Wildwood Way be open all the way to Highway 55.
Which we got. Thank you very much. Okay. Agenda item number 5 under recognitions is the introduction of North Carolina District 37 Representative-elect Erin Gray. She is a Holly Springs resident, recently served as a member of the Holly Springs Board of Adjustment, served as its vice chair. She's also served as PTA president of Holly Ridge Elementary. She grew up in Hendron, am I saying it right, Hendron? Virginia, I got that right. And graduated with an MA in International Commerce and Policy and a BA in Governmental International Politics from George Mason University. She's a member-elect of the North Carolina General Assembly, representing, again, State's 37th House District. She's also a violinist who founded a terrific youth orchestra in Holly Springs. It is now my honor and privilege to introduce, for those of you who have not met her, Erin Perret. Please come forward. Again, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much,
You're
Mayor
welcome. Thank
Sears,
you.
for having me. Thank you, Council. Thank you for having me. It's nice to meet you. I won't go on and on, but I wanted to express my sincere appreciation to this council and to Mayor Sears for this opportunity to introduce myself to you and for your service over the years, Mayor. And Council, I look forward to working with you. I see this as an opportunity to do some really good work for our town and our district here in Southern Lake County. So I look at this as an opportunity, and I feel very blessed to have that opportunity to be able to serve you and to represent you and to give you a voice in the State House. And in 2021, to me, is going to be a year of hope and renewal and opportunity. So I look forward to creating those opportunities with your help and solving problems. So I look at it as a team effort. So I look forward to getting to know, well, I know most of you up here except for one person, but I look forward to getting to know you better and to working with you. And I can't wait to get started. So thank you so much. Please know that my door is always open to each and every one of you. And so is my cell phone and my email. So please, if you need anything from me at all, if you have anything you want to talk about, anything that's important to you, I want to hear about it. So I hope to be speaking to you soon. And I hope you have a very happy Merry Christmas and Happy New Year and Happy Holidays. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Welcome aboard.
Thanks, Aaron.
Senator Searcy, we've been trying to get hold of, we will, and probably in the next meeting or two, Randy? Correct. We'll have a very similar presentation by Senator Searcy. Say again, I'm sorry. I'm out. Sorry. No, it's all right.
Just bragging because you checked for someone like me.
You know, I wonder if that's it. I wonder if that's it. Jeff will fix it. All right, sounds good. We'll go to agenda item number 6, request communications, the Holly Springs Police Department Annual Report for 2020. My pleasure to introduce Paul LaCory, Police Chief. Welcome, Chief.
Mayor Sears, Council, thank you for having me this evening. Would like to just acknowledge all the men and women at the police department who put in a tremendous amount of work over the last year and who helped compile this report. And I'd like to, in particular, recognize Captain Jay Brunner, who's in the back of the room, for his hard work in producing this document as well. I'm going to give a quick, the highlights of some of the report, please, are that the quick snapshot of the department is that we remain at 69 sworn officers within the department. 11 new officers came on board over the reporting period, many who were lateral officers from other departments with previous law enforcement experience. The department continues to receive a number of achievements and awards. A few that we'd like to highlight are that the law enforcement torch run for Special Olympics that the Holly Springs Police Department raised over $42,000 for that effort. We were one of the top producing police departments in the state of North Carolina.
Right.
And that we'd also like to recognize that our officers are continuing to progress professionally, participating in North Carolina State University's Law Enforcement Executives Program and 2 more of our sergeants achieved the highest advanced law enforcement certification, which is the highest certification you can get in the state of North Carolina. We're also improving upon our technology as a department, and we're continuing to move forward and research new technologies that will help us be more efficient. One of those technologies that came on board over this reporting period was the automatic vehicle location dispatching system. This helps benefit the citizens of Holly Springs because it now uses global positioning systems, or GPS, to find the nearest patrol car to dispatch them to an incident. So that includes medical emergencies, to where we often are closer than a fire or an EMS unit, so that we can get there more quickly because we are now geographically dispatched as opposed to coming from a fixed location, or just because that was someone's assigned geographical beat in the past. The other one that I know is of much interest to the council is body worn camera systems. And an update, we are continuing to research. We are well into the testing and evaluation portion of body worn camera systems. I think I need not tell the council, but just as for those in the audience, that going to a body worn camera system will enhance accuracy in reporting for the officers. It will rapidly resolve complaints. It will help us as a department identify any training needs that we need, both on an individual or as on a agency-wide level, and it's going to provide greater accountability. The report also gives a snapshot into our operations as a department. Not surprisingly, there is a correlation between the 20% increase in the town's population over the last 5 years and the corresponding 23% increase in calls for service. There's also one segment of our calls for service that I think is often overlooked by the police department that I would like to highlight. That's our increasing trend in animal control services. This year, the town's only two current animal control officers handled 3,145 calls.
Wow.
With an overall increase over the last 5 years for animal services. And that's obviously a correlation with population. As more people move into the town, more pets are arriving as well. Holly Springs residents continue to enjoy an extremely low violent crime rate that is almost 10 times lower than the national average. And you can see we are down in most Part 1 crimes, which are categorized mostly as violent crimes. Additionally, Holly Springs property crime rate is more than 3 times less than the national average as well. And then we have more statistics inside the report that go into a little bit more depth. Our arrest data. Last year, we ran more than 61,000 calls for service inside the town. And then less than 1% of those calls resulted in arrests. So again, that's speak to the town's very low crime rate and the department's professionalism. Our arrest and traffic stop demographic data. The report takes a much closer evaluation of this data, and more research is needed to get a fuller understanding of the demographic data in those areas. And we recognize there is a disparage between the population of the town and the arrest and traffic data, and that is something that we are more closely looking at. In our use of force, there were only 3 instances of use of force that meet our criteria for reporting over the course of the reporting period. So again, with 61,390 calls and 409 arrests, that there was only these 3 instances. And again, this demonstrates our professionalism and our commitment and practice to de-escalating situations and trying to handle instances or incidents at the lowest level. I'd also like to report that we had 0 vehicle pursuits in the reporting period as well. Traffic continues to be one of the primary focuses for the police department. Last year, the department responded to 919 total collisions. 112 of those resulted in injuries and 2 with fatalities. Compared to 2019, that's an increase where we had approximately 831 collisions in the previous reporting period. Community engagement continues to be one of the primary things that this department continues to focus on. Prior to COVID, the department participated in a number of in-person events. And despite the pandemic, the department found creative ways to continue its outreach efforts and to expand and meet with diverse groups within our community. I know that's a very quick overview, but I think if you see the report, I know that'll be published on the transparency portal shortly for the public to see. And if there's any questions, I'm open to meeting with members of the council and the mayor if there's any further questions.
I'm guessing there might be some questions or comments from anybody.
Guess I'll start. Just a quick one, Chief, since you're new to us, obviously a new set of fresh eyes, if you will. Anything that surprises you looking at this review from something you thought before you got here to something that might be different? And that's not intended to be good, bad, or negative, just any of the above.
No, I think obviously before I even applied here, I did my research on the town. And I wanted to emphasize that the statistics really do show that Holly Springs continues to be one of the safest communities in all of North Carolina and probably in all the country. When you look at the report in more depth, you really see the graphs really speak to how low you can barely see Holly Springs, bar graph compared to, data compared to the state or nationally as well. So I'm not surprised by anything that's really in this. I think the number of events that we do for the community and the commitment for here, I'm very pleased with that level. I don't want to say I'm surprised, I'm just pleased. And I think we can, there's more opportunities to expand upon that and diversify our community engagement. And I think with any suburban community, especially one that's, if you would, a breakfast community for the Research Triangle. And now as we're getting more exurbs that are even further south of us and traveling through, that our traffic is obviously a concern, but that also is not surprising.
Other questions or comments? Safest place to live in North Carolina, I say.
We're hoping to keep it that way, sir.
I understand.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 7, the consent agenda, Mayor Pro Tem.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
What's been made, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Thank you. Then item number 9, new business resolution authorizing eminent domain to acquire utility easements for the Carolina Springs Force Main. Counselor John Chafano, Town Attorney.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor, members of council, thank you very much. The town entered into a development agreement with Carolina Springs developer. As part of that agreement, the developer is required to construct a rather large force main, sanitary sewer force main and pump station to pump it from the Carolina Springs development, which is, as you'll recall, will also serve a couple of new schools and a fire station, town fire station, a new town public park. So this evening, the developer was tasked with acquiring all the offsite easements. And they were successful. There were 20 total properties that needed to be acquired. They were successful in 16 out of the 20 properties. There were 4 property owners that did not want to sell any easement rights to the town through the developer's efforts of acquiring those. We're still trying to work that out, but time is of the essence with respect to being able to acquire the rights to put the sewer line in. So there are 4 relatively small takings that are very close to the right of way. They're in the setback, unbuildable area. What this resolution does is allows me to file 4 lawsuits to acquire that right of way, and we realize that's a uncomfortable thing for most people to think about, but we do require the law requires us to deposit fair market value with the court for the amount of the easements as determined by a real estate appraisal, certified real estate appraisal, which we have 4 of those. So it's not that the town is taking the property without compensation, or they're compensating for the right, the easement rights that we are seeking to acquire. So the resolution will authorize me to file those lawsuits, pay a deposit into the clerk, which the landowners can easily obtain that money, and allows the town and the developers for the of the sewer line.
Is there questions or comments at this point from our town attorney?
Here's the question.
Please.
Did the appraisal take into account, you said it's close to the right of way. Is there any fences or big trees or other things that might not have been put into the amount that the owners will want us to consider?
None of these are, with the exception of one, 3 of the 4 are not owner occupied residential areas. The one that is doesn't have any landscaping. The house is set very far back from the road on a 5-acre tract. You know, the town doesn't typically compensate for volunteer forestry, you know, just stuff that grows up in the ground. But if there was, and I can't recall of any like landscaping that people paid for, but if there was, I'm very certain that there's not on any of these 4. If there was, we would replace that. Replace planted landscaping with what was there. If we tear down a 3 or 4-year-old pine, if you will, we typically don't reseed. We cannot reseed over these.
Other questions or comments? Looking good? You want to tackle a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution 2046.
Second.
Motion been made and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Counselor. Then item number 10, resolution for town attorney to petition court for compliance with the minimum housing ordinance. That would be Daniel Pope.
Hi, Council
How you doing?
and Mr. Mayor. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me tonight. This is about the unfinished business from the minimum housing ordinance from our last meeting on September 15th. The purpose of this is to review the progress and to consider deferral of resolution directing the homeowner to comply with the minimum housing standards. And the suggested action is to defer the resolution 20-26 for 60 more days to allow additional time for compliance with the minimum housing standards. General Statute 160A-441 is the minimum housing standards, and that statute grants the authority to the jurisdiction by the ordinance to cause dwellings to be repaired, vacated, demolished, or closed for noncompliance with that standard. This is the timeline of the engagement with the homeowner from September 15th until present. There have been 11 noted engagements with the homeowner, and many of them have been on site to discuss repairs and help them achieve their goal of compliance. Some items that have been completed is the roof and the exterior siding on the north end of the structure, which prevents water intrusion from entering. Some electrical issues, especially from the interior master bedroom, have been fixed. The ceiling in the living room, which was having a leak, has also been patched up. Smoke alarms have been installed and added by the Town of Holly Springs Fire Department. And rear access to the dilapidated exterior porch has been closed off to prevent usage. Some items that still remain that need addressed, the eaves and fascia on the north end of the building above the siding, those need to be fixed to prevent rodents and water intrusion. Electrical cover plates on the interior and exterior of the structure. The front porch bolsters are needed to provide support for the railing. There are several holes throughout the interior of the structure that need to be addressed and patched to keep rodents, insects from entering. And the bathroom ventilation system needs to be addressed to prevent moisture, humidity, air pollutants, and other odors. And the suggested motion that I bring before you tonight is to defer resolution 20-26 for a period of 60 more days so that they have enough time to complete those fixes that are needed. And I open up the floor for any questions that
Questions
anybody
or
might
comments?
have.
Yeah, questions or comments, please? Scott, anything to add? And welcome back, Scott.
I just want to appreciate Andrew Rubley's presentation. He had to step in for Daniel. Daniel's out on sick leave, and so he's here stepping in for Daniel. Andrew primarily has done the inspections on the site property. He's very familiar with the property, but we're here to entertain any questions at this time. We are advocates for moving forward with this 60-day deferral. I think it would give the owner some additional time to make the necessary repairs in the next 60 days. I will say that this continues to be a serious situation. We don't take what's occurred so far very lightly. One of the reasons I did want to be up here tonight as the Interim Development Services Director and involved in this, that from a staff perspective, I'm going to go to the site myself and go along with Andrew and Daniel to continue to evaluate the progress over the next 60 days. And hopefully we can report back to you in February with some good news.
I think that's important. Other questions or comments of either Andrew or Scott?
So it sounds like we continue on a positive path and or continue to make effort
Yes.
towards.
Making progress.
Progress is ongoing.
Yeah. Any other comments? Questions? Let's hit the motion.
Motion to defer resolution 20-26 for a period of 60 additional days.
Second.
Motion been made, second, all in favor.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Agenda item 11, other business. Let's do it this way, and we've already talked about this. Let's go through the normal other business handlings, and then we'll go to the landfill right after we're done. I'll start off by saying a couple things. The new Aldi now is open, in case you didn't know. It's over by, just off 55, matter of fact, you can see it at 55. So it's open, let you know that. We always talk about COVID-19. Through Friday, December 11th, Lake County has had 33,744 cases. That's a lot, not the most. And deaths, unfortunately, 322. However, and I really commend our zip code, who I think is doing a great job in following all the 3 W's, et cetera. We've had 958 cases, but only 3 unfortunate deaths. 3. And I think, again, congratulations to those who are working hard. To that point, the only last thing I got is I got a message from Roy Temke, who is the COO of Rex. And as of Thursday, they're going to start inoculations. And they have 2,900 doses right now for 5,000. Pfizer has to do it twice. So that's part of the game. And that starts on Thursday. It will be primarily to those who work with COVID-19, health workers and doctors, same thing. So that's kind of good news. I think we're on the right track. Now we're waiting for the other 2. Let's hope it comes very quickly. That's all I got. Other comments from anybody at this point? Go ahead.
I'll go on a personal note. This Thursday, I am going in for a colonoscopy, having turned the big 50 earlier this year. And I just want to encourage those folks listening to definitely get one if you're at that age or have a family history. Prostate cancer is extremely and very curable when caught early, but very devastating if if ignored and spread. So get on it if you are of a certain age. Also, I wish my daughter a happy 12th birthday tomorrow.
Did you notice he looked right at me when the other age came up? But you're right. You're
I
absolutely.
was avoiding eye contact. So.
I know. Who else?
I'll just say a few words that the event that the staff has been putting on to help celebrate the holiday season has been spectacular. And the residents have just been so pleased with, in these circumstances, to come up with things that are innovative and help with the spirit has been great. I went to the tree trail several times and folks just loved all the trees. Staff's been great. Santa just drove by my house just around 6 o'clock tonight, so that's been fantastic. So kudos to staff. They really, and it's the communication, the Parks and Rec, all of the folks in Public Works helping with the decorations, our police force, the firemen. Anyway, it makes me proud to know that everyone is doing the best they can in this time. So with that, I do want to express Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa. If you won't be back until January, but please stay safe. COVID is serious, and I hope that folks take it seriously. All of the CW.
Others?
I have two things, Mr. Mayor. Number one, thank you to Mr. McConnell and his high school civics class over at Holly Springs High School. Got to join their Google Meet class last Friday during their state and local government unit and just talk about what's going on in Holly Springs. And I fielded a lot of questions from the kids. The most popular one was, are we getting a Bojangles? And I was able to tell them that we are indeed getting a Bojangles. Followed up quickly by, are we ever going to get a Cookout? And then we got into talking about franchise businesses and things like that, and how Cookout chooses to place their location. So all in all, a lot of good questions on the town, our growth projections, where we're headed, and a lot of interesting, bright minds we have over there at the high school. So thanks to Mr. McConnell for that opportunity. Secondly, I haven't had a lot of consensus from the group on the personnel reviews for our attorney and our clerk. So I did want to bring that up again tonight and just make sure. I think we can still do it in January on the timeline that we have. It would take a little help, Randy from HR and staff, just to get that form up and running. And I'm committed to do that this week and work with staff to make sure we get that done. And secondarily, as long as our clerk and our attorney are okay with that, I think we'll operate on the guise that we'll look to conduct those reviews when we get back in January. And we just ask for a memo of your 2020 accomplishments before we close down for the holidays. So I'll follow up with more email direction on that tomorrow. But if we have consensus on that timeline, I think we can probably get it done.
All right.
Was everyone okay with adding that other category?
On the descriptions, yeah, I think if we need to, I would consider that outside of their process. But yeah, I'm fine. I mean, I'm fine with it. We can. I think Randy came back with some comments on best language, so I think we can work with John and Linda both on each of theirs to add that into the descriptions they sent in.
Others?
Yeah, I'll go, Mayor. So 2 weeks ago, we were talking about COVID and the state of the county. And as you mentioned, Wake County is still doing better than most. But as of 2 weeks ago, we were in the county monitoring system in yellow. I just want to make everybody aware we're now in the orange, which is indicating substantial spread. So we're kind of trending in the wrong direction. But as a county, Holly Springs is only a small portion of it. So over the last couple of weeks before meetings, I've been checking the number of cases. As of 2 weeks ago before the meeting, we were at 796 total. And then as of our workshop, we were at 913. And as of now, we are at 1,013, as the mayor said, up to 3 deaths. So we're going up in the zip code, I won't say the town, by about 100 or so cases a week, which is much more rapid than during the initial lockdowns during the spring, much more rapid than during the summer, and that makes sense. We're seeing a surge everywhere. And this is having some unfortunate consequences. The school board is meeting tonight to discuss possibly shutting down in-person instruction when students return in after winter break, or possibly going back to rotations. It's really upsetting. I know my kids have benefited immensely from being back in school. There's a lot of students in town who don't have access to reliable Wi-Fi, who are getting left behind. A lot of parents who are having to forego employment to be home to school their kids. And it's vitally important that we keep our kids in school for their emotional and their educational health. And you know, talking with some officials, the reason is not because we're getting substantial spread in schools. Kids are not bringing it in. The reason is a staffing issue, that they're having trouble keeping their school staffed because so many of our teachers and school staff are getting exposed outside of the school, right? And it's not necessarily their fault. It's people who they come in contact with who aren't taking the proper precautions. Mayor, you know, you and I were talking before the meeting. I had a little bit of a problem last week where one of my employees who I'm in close contact with kind of still irresponsibly disregarded CDC guidelines and traveled to a wedding out of state. Now, luckily, she wore her mask and stood away from people who weren't, but afterwards she had multiple family members who told her that they tested positive for COVID. This happened on Sunday. I worked with her on Monday. On Tuesday, I was in a meeting with all of you fine people. And then on Wednesday, she told me this, and I told her, you know what, you need to stay home and test negative. And thankfully, she came back and tested negative. My staff was able to keep up and running because they wear masks 24/7 if they were in our building 24/7, but they will wear a mask for 10 or 11 hours during a shift and not complain once, and they've been doing that for several months, so they were protected. My associate who was exposed was also wearing a mask, and thankfully we haven't had any problems because of that. But I was really worried that I had potentially put my colleagues at risk because I didn't know, because an associate of mine went a couple hundred miles away and people that I didn't meet were not being responsible and following the 3 Ws and doing what they were supposed to do. You know, I'm not an epidemiologist. I took epidemiology courses, but I am not an epidemiologist. I took courses in public health, but I am not a public health official. I rely on people who do that for a living to collect data, interpret that data, and give me recommendations. And I thank you, Mayor, for passing along the governor's letter where he was encouraging local officials to consider adopting civic penalties or giving police officers the ability to impose civic penalties on those not wearing a mask. And I don't know if it's right for Holly Springs. There are pros and cons and probably good arguments on both sides. It's an issue that's fraught with all sorts of consequences and ripe for disagreement, especially now. But I thought it was at least in light of where we're trending, a worthwhile thing to discuss even briefly as a group to consider thought.
I will say one thing. We had a Zoom meeting with Dr. Cohen, I guess it was yesterday. And I think one thing that came out of it was number one, be smart. The vaccines are coming. But number two, and we did this before I heard from anybody else. We were planning to go to visit my son in Wisconsin and then go to California to visit my other son and his family. And we and many of my friends, we talked about this a lot. One of the suggestions everybody's making is if you can postpone that trip until later, please do. Please do. It's so important that you're not going out and having big parties in California, particularly, which is a disaster state. You know, we're not so great ourselves, but compared to California, that's a total disaster. So we canceled our trip. Very unfortunate, hard to do. My wife in particular was very disappointed not to see her son and mine. And I think that came across very quickly that a lot of people that I know have canceled. Well, they already canceled some of the Thanksgiving parties they're going to have, and or particularly Christmas and New Year's, keeping it small. So, so far, I'm kind of proud to say, and I think that the chief would agree with me, we have not had a purpose yet for citations, but they do make visits to the various businesses. And I think if it ever would come to that, it would be okay to do so. But versus painting a broad brush on Mecklenburg County and everybody else, if it's necessary, we'll do it. It's just that simple. So that's my story, but a lot of people just canceling trips, and it's sad, but it's important. Other comments?
And I'll add on to that, Mayor. I agree that it's a part of it, and I think that we've done a good job at the town. One of the things that I disagree with how this all was implemented from the top down was putting the onus on this and on business owners. It puts business owners in a real tough position. As a business owner, it's uncomfortable to ask a client who you're trying to solicit money from, put on a mask, something that's become very politicized. And when I travel to businesses in Holly Springs and I see folks in stores who are ignoring the mandate and I ask the staff about it, they hate it, right? They don't like being put at risk. A lot of these people are essential workers and they don't want to have to be put at risk from irresponsible customers. But they don't feel that they have the power to do it. So I just want to say that as employees and as business owners, if you feel that you need the support, I feel like or as you said, our police department is there to support you in enforcing these mandates. It's a horrible situation to be in, but it's an important thing to do. It's an important responsibility as a member of the community to do that.
Other comments?
For Councilman Wolf's comments there, I completely agree with you on the business owner perspective. I'm glad you brought that up. We're now 9 months into this, and unfortunately for me, I see that this is legislation asleep at the wheel, and I will put that at the state level. Councilor and I had a discussion about this the other day. We've had 9 months to do something about this. I know we've had an election season go along, but legislation has basically, in my opinion, failed us. And so how they failed us initially was they put that onus way back in the April-May timeframe on business owners, rather than compelling legislation to provide some overarching guidance, much as the council and I discussed the other day, seatbelt law, which is non-binding. It's not a crime that stays on your record, but it is potentially a way to compel someone to basic compliance. Unfortunately, we haven't had that. We haven't had the debate and the discussion because we continue on this overarching emergency order declaration, which last I checked, nothing is happening on an emergent basis any longer. I mean, may have been back in March. We're not in a continuing emergency. Certainly we're here having these discussions and we go 2 weeks between times and we have time to discuss whether or not we think this is prudent or not. Much like our, state and, broader legislation has had the opportunity to do so. So now I see the legislation trying to be pushed down to a local ordinance level rather than the governor, again, doing the right thing and leading the charge to try and provide overarching state legislation so you don't have disparate ordinance between Perry, Fuquay, Apex, Holly Springs, whatever happens to be each local individual locality doing something different. So again, I see it as an abrogation of a legitimate debate that should have been going on for the last 9 months. And so the governor chose again in this order to basically try and push down that responsibility to put the burden on either a business owner to be the bad guy or now for a local municipality to be the bad guy, if you will, to enforce this. So while I agree, and we need to get away from, quite honestly, what's going on about the narrative, and I think we bear some of the responsibility to make sure that people hear the right message. And again, I've been talking about this since we started this whole discussion back in, the April-May timeframe, that, broad brushing with a very wide stroke on what the requirements are for the 6 Ws gets some people, craw up and they just decide to rebel against the rules because the rules aren't the rules. And what I mean by that is we say, well, and I've seen this across not only the messaging in the governor's letter or other folks around our local area and saying, anytime you're outside your house, you need to wear a mask. Okay. Again, you're going to get people who actually are smart enough to look at what the governor's order put out there. And the governor's order doesn't say that. And I'll read it exactly what it says. It says, require, subject to certain exceptions. So there's still those 11 or 13 exceptions that require you not, or that give you the opportunity to not wear a mask. That face coverings must be worn indoors if sharing a space with another person who is not a member of the same household. I agree. So you're in a business, probably not with your same household, and must be worn outdoors if it is not possible to consistently remain outside of 6 feet. But it does not say you have to have, and I've already seen this come up, and I brought it up before when we first started this, of the people that go out there and have angst about this because somebody outdoors is not wearing a mask, because that's the way it's being communicated and articulated by state and other leadership. But that's not what it says. So again, you get people that are going to go, well, I'm just not going to do it because you're not even following your own guidance. So this is the slippery slope that I see that we're in, and I agree with what we're talking about here. I got my mask on. I wear it when I go in and out of, buildings, but when I'm outdoors and I'm outside of 6 feet of other people, my mask is off. Breathe some fresh air and get some good, vitamin D from the sun, being out in sunlight. So all things that are healthy for us that we've learned from this, virus. So again, from that perspective, I'm certainly not a fan of this because I continue to see this as our upper echelon leadership at the state level trying to push things down to other people and an abrogation of legislation and debate that has had 9 months to go on and hasn't.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you, Councilman. The one thing I point out is the governor doesn't make legislation.
Correct.
Can't compel legislation. We've had a legislature that's asleep at the wheel, and I wish our representative was still here, but we'll have opportunities to talk through it, I'm sure. And I agree with you completely that it's a rule with no teeth, right? And it puts an undue strain on businesses that are already under strain. This is a potential opportunity to lead as a town. If we did this, would be popular amongst most. I don't know, popular amongst half, maybe. Would be unpopular, sure, but it's an opportunity to lead. I think I've proven I've never shrinked away from the desire to do something that I felt was right for public safety, even if it was unpopular and controversial. And I understand that there's probably not appetite to do it, but I do appreciate the ability to discuss it because I think it is important that people know that this is something that's being talked about, that wearing a mask and following these rules is important, and that the Secretary of Public Health, the Secretary of DHHS wrote to us and said, we need stronger enforcement of these mandates for public health. We might not take that decision up as a council, but it is still important for us to say to people, this is serious, follow the mandates. And hopefully in a few months, we're all vaccinated and we come through this on the other side. Numbers look bad right now. Not as bad as other places, but they're not good. We need to strap down and get through this winter.
Okay. Other comments?
In thinking of what Councilman Wolf said and Councilman McGrath, I was-
Let me make a suggestion. Get the microphone a little closer to you.
Sure. I was thinking about the impact that COVID has had on our state, in our homes, in our businesses, in our work, and our kids. And the one thing that I can appreciate right now, and Dr. Wolf, you beat me to it, is I think instead of thinking it's being a bad guy, it's an opportunity to lead. And the thing that I appreciate with asking the community to lead is not all communities are in the same boat. I mean, it depends what county you're in. Some counties have much lower numbers than others. And I think it's important for us to look at how we are trending. And if we're trending high, I do think that as a leadership opportunity, we could communicate that we are concerned about the health of our residents. We want to support our businesses and make it easy for them, to not put the burden on them. So I think it's a communication opportunity that we can do. The folks who don't want to wear a mask, maybe if they saw it from another perspective and saw some leadership in terms of some tone, maybe that would help. So I think of it more that way and would support if we wanted to do another kind of communication push to say, we really want our community to come out of this the other side. Particularly because I know that we only have 3 deaths, but much like births, I talked to somebody at the state and they were saying death certificates occur where you pass. So if you're in the Raleigh Hospital or the Cary Hospital, that's why the death certificate is registered, much like birth certificates. If you're born at Rex or Wake Med, that's where you say you're born, even though you live in Holly Springs. So I really don't know what the number is for Holly Springs. I do know some people in town that have died of COVID. So I prefer the thought that maybe we could lead and to show that we could and model. I mean, I wear my mask all the time. I just got accepted for a clinical trial for another vaccine that's being looked at. I want to do all I can to help get us through this because it's going to be a long road. I mean, our company today, they don't even expect us to maybe come back to September because of the time it'll take for everybody to be vaccinated. And I mean, we're not out of it. The vaccine's here, but it's not like we're going to be done in a month or two. It's still a long road. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Who else?
I'll just add just a little bit to that. I agree with Councilwoman Kelly about just maybe another education push, some to bring it back into light to our residents. Because I think all too often we look at businesses, retail, and restaurants as kind of the main source of spread, but they are a tiny source of spread, but they bear most of the work of trying to contain it. I think New York released some information on contact tracing on where spread comes from, and it's indoor private gatherings. And the only way to solve it, but mitigate that is, I think, through education, communication, modeling, and not the police action. And so if we really want to get this under control a bit better, we do need to target that source of spread, which is indoor private gatherings. Unfortunately, at this time of year, it's popular with the parties and cookie exchanges and so forth, but targeting businesses and indoor dining and so forth is not a good bang for your buck and stopping the spread. I think education, modeling, encouraging folks to just enjoy a more private, virtual holiday, if you will, will go a much longer way.
Thank you, Pete. Anybody else before we turn over? Dan?
I don't have a lot to add, Mr. Mayor. I think when we get into these conversations about potential policy matters, one of the first things that always comes up is what are our neighbors doing? What are other towns doing? And we haven't discussed really much of that. I don't hear a lot of other towns implement or municipalities in Wake County implementing stricter enforcement procedures than what the state is already doing. So it can be a matter of leadership, or it can be a matter of consensus with other municipalities and what they're already doing or not doing. And I think that stands out to me. Anecdotally, I think I've heard Fuquay has done some enforcement, but I don't know if that was a policy matter that they came up with and did in the form of an ordinance, which is what the letter from the governor had asked, was for a local ordinance to impose civil penalties. I don't know if they've done that, but I haven't heard much of any other municipality increasing the penalties or passing ordinances to implement civil penalties. And speaking of anecdotes, I had a situation today where my family got involved in a scam, if you will, with a sales transaction, and there was some stuff sent to our house as part of this, and we were catfished in a way, and we had to get the police department involved. And when speaking to them about this issue, at the end of the call, the officer took everything, gave us some advice on how we should resolve it and close it off on our end, and then he was nice enough to document everything and open a case number in case there was any further issue. But then he said, we can't take this any farther. We don't have the bandwidth to really go off and investigate this. And it was a cyber situation, online type transactions. And So I didn't expect them to really run through the internet to try and figure out how to solve this, but it was just an interesting point that was, if they don't have the bandwidth to look at some of those things that are occurring, I would be hard pressed to say dumping more enforcement for something that could be highly charged and highly combative between our residents on different sides or different viewpoints about masks or the virus or whatever. Now asking our police to go and enforce those situations and issue civil citations, which are fines. So we'll fine our own residents $100, whatever it may be, to wear a mask. I don't know that that's the best work that our police could be doing right now when it seems like they're already pretty burdened with the caseload that they have. So I'm a little sensitive to that. And if moving forward on stricter enforcement is the best thing, best use of our resources, time from a staff perspective and a police perspective as well. And I tend to concur with the education. I know we did that. That was how this same conversation resulted back in April. We passed out materials to all of our businesses and asked them to post that. We did education. I think staff's done a good job continuing to remind folks at our events and in our publications what the recommendations are. Every newsletter that's come out since March has had the 3 W's in there. So we are doing continued education. But if we want to go back to businesses or other places that have get not large, but have gatherings of people, then I'm all for continuing the education. I don't think we can do enough of that, but the enforcement I think is a tough one right now.
Well, let me just say, and we can finish this off. But one, I'm going to need that story about the catfishing later. Two, I completely agree with Councilman Billitson about the educational piece on family gatherings. There's just numerous studies that show that the main source of spread is within the house. So keeping your social circle small, limiting family gatherings to nuclear families is super important. I agree with the Mayor Pro Tem about using our neighboring communities not only as models, not only as places to look to see the effects of ordinances when they're available before we have them. That's super important. Apex recently shut down all their town facilities through January, right, because of the surge. And it is also important to constantly be in contact with our neighboring municipalities because we are a drop in the bucket, and without unified implementation of these things, we're only going to get so far, right? Somebody has to go first, and maybe that's not best for Holly Springs, but somebody will have to go first, and then everybody else will have to follow suit eventually. But the last thing I'll say is, and I am sensitive to the burden on our police department. It is not something light, and it's not something we should not consider, but it is a matter of priorities. Right, when the shutdowns first happened, we kind of scaled back traffic stops to limit contact between our officers and the public. We can prioritize certain things, and so when we think about this, and if things continue to get worse and this does come back up for discussion, I would just encourage people to think about it as, yes, this is an added responsibility for our police department, and they will have to prioritize it above other things. And is it worthwhile to public health to prioritize this above other priorities of the police department, right? We do that all the time. Sometimes certain crimes, certain public safety measures take priority over the others, and it would be adding something else to their bucket, another load on their back. We should only do that if it's important to public safety. And I think as a group, we don't agree on whether that is the case right now. And I think we do agree that an educational push is needed. And I think that it's super important and a great first step. I would just hope that everybody stays open-minded, continues to monitor the situation, and that if needed, we can continue discussion at a later time.
Okay. At this point, we probably should move to the landfill issue from the landfill committee. I don't know, Sean, Christine, both on the committee. You know who's going to go first, or have you got that far? I don't, it doesn't matter to me.
I didn't know we were going to do slides. So I know Christine has teed up some slides that I haven't had a chance to review. So that's just to be clear, I'll let Christine go from that perspective because I haven't had a chance to look at what's being presented on the slides from what she's doing.
Okay. Christine, you're on.
Sure. Well, Sean and I, based off of the council's resolution that we did last February, we've been part of a task force. And out of the list of the task force, our greater committee is looking at all of the resolution points. And then a subset of us broke off to do an alternate solution for the task force committee. And, oh, thank you, Linda. These are the folks, most of the folks are actually in the main task force. So maybe at the end, Sean, you can talk about the stuff you've been doing with DFL and Wood County. With this particular task force, we have folks from Arbor Creek, 12 Oaks, Sunset Ridge, the New Hill Road area, and the Village Center. And if you go to the next slide, where our focus has been out of that resolution is really look at the alternative waste disposal or elimination methods, including exploration of early landfill closure options, alternative disposal sites for the region's solid waste energy, which is one of the first bullets, and then also look at an odor reporting and resident engagement mobile app. The reason that I was asking for us to talk is that in March, the commissioners met to talk about the landfill, and it was very much focused on Wake County's landfill from that perspective, which I understand. They met again in September to talk about a plan, and even in that plan, some of the comments I personally gave was that it does not really speak to the Holly Springs perspective. And so what this committee is doing, thinking of those 2 points in our resolution, and we're trying to gather information. We've met 4 times. It's work towards what do we want to say to the county commissioners, because there are some new people on the county commissioners. They might not know the background. And I think overall, a lot of folks, even in our town, could use education and even the history. How did we get there? How did we get there? So we, in our committee, we're branching off and just doing some research. Again, we're not sure what we'll present and work with the rest of the committee with Sean. But just a few points what we've done so far. So in the history, and this is taken off of right off of the website for Wade County, they do give a pretty good timeline and all the things that have happened around the landfill. And this is actually a picture of the town in 93, December of 93. So the town was very small when we first started with the landfill. And if you think about in the 1991 timeframe, our group found a study that was done, and the link is there for the study, but it talked about somebody saying that 10 years ago, which would have been, and the study was done in 1999, but it's saying 10 years ago, the reality of the town is they were saying 40% of Holly Springs residents had outdoor toilets, bad sanitation, no indoor plumbing. So you got to put into perspective when this is all happening, when the county is coming to us, our town was desperate for some wastewater treatment infrastructure. So that's the mindset that they had in a very small town. So as well, at that time, if you look at 1990, Holly Springs was predominantly an African American community. And if you look at the per capita, it was also, most of the people are African American. And if you look at the per capita, they made less than the other, like the white community. So that's the reality of what was happening when the landfill came in. In those discussions, they were desperate for some infrastructure. So they did make a deal with the county. And in these documents, and this is what we're still learning in the history, at the point of the documents were signed, they were thinking that we were allocating around 300 acres to support a solid waste management facility. And then they talk about they were able to, the county was going to say, we'll help build some infrastructure and in return, help us build a solid waste landfill. Now, there are some in this room, including our esteemed attorney and mayor, that fought very hard when it came down to the landfill actually moving forward, saying that by the time the landfill was coming in, and we have a lot of digging and more to do here just to build that narrative, but the folks in town, a lot of them were fighting against the landfill. So I think it's important for the new county commissioners to understand the history of this, that it was a hard decision for us to bring in a landfill, but it's because I don't think the folks at that time had vote. So then if we go to the issues, there are multiple issues that the committee is talking about: environmental concerns, the litter, the negative impact on local businesses and the quality of life. But it pretty much centers around the odor issues. And really, if you think about the odor issues, if we didn't smell the landfill, probably nobody would even think about it, but we do. And if you look at the size of our town now, we're the 3rd largest municipality in the county. So in that municipality, we have this landfill. So the landfill right now is, I think it depends on where you look at, how many acres. Some places there's 472, I think it depends on what phases they include, but it's quite large. And we are just finishing off phase 2A, and they're just starting to put in the infrastructure for phase 2B. So if you look at where we're going with that, if you think about that's the landfill, I think the next one is a map, and you look at the proximity of this is the landfill, looking at how it's centered around our town. And this is again from the Wake County, the way they track. They look at rings like half mile, mile, 1.5 mile, 2 miles. This is our committee making a point to say there's a school within the half-mile area, which is Pine Springs Academy, and multiple daycares. There's quite a few businesses that are there. King Park, which is something that the county supported us getting, is very close to the landfill. So in the best practices, and that's one of the things that we're researching, and the Wake County staff's been great to work with us as well, is what are the best practices to say what should we expect in terms of the amount of odor in our town when you think about your kids at school or the businesses that we have, because it's not just where you live, it's also where you shop, where you go to school, where you play. And that's really what we're trying to get our hands around, like how big is this problem? And so we have some folks are calling people they know in other countries that have some familiarity with landfills. We're just trying to grasp from a grassroots effort, a resident effort, what are the things that we could bring forth to just question, hey, can you look into other ways that we could look at how this impacts our town? So if we go, going at the information, they have been tracking odors. It started with a Survey Monkey in 2015 and recently went to a more formal varsity product. And looking at how they've tracked the things before, wind has been a factor, the amount of rain has been a factor, looking at the number of complaints that we've had. And really, in terms of some of their slides, they've talked about they're expecting 85 to 90% of the issues to be around a half mile. Okay, so if we think about that, well, we're smelling it outside. So how big is this problem? Okay. In the odor form now, you get to fill it out. You go and find it on the Wake County land site. And the form is easy to find if you Google. It's easy to fill out if you're at your home. You do have to identify what kind of smell you think you have. But it is cumbersome if you are in a resident or in a business, if you go shopping or at school. I've talked to folks that don't really know about the form, but the form is key for folks to fill out because this form is what the Wake County and GFL is using to monitor how bad are things out there. So it's not the friendliest form, and I think there's an opportunity if we stay with this particular form, what's the best way for us to get this information to work, that it makes more sense for our average residents. Here are two responses I've had. One that says that the odor was most likely coming from the landfill. The other one said it was most likely not coming from the landfill and listed many other possible sources of odor. So we're looking into what does that mean? How often does that happen? I know in the meeting they had, I think it was September, they talked about out of their complaints, it was a high percentage that actually were from our landfill. So what are those numbers and how do we make that easier to understand? So, go ahead, yeah. So these are the comments from the sub-task force, but they're saying, you know, something has happened where the odors from the landfill are really bad today, and it was not like that years ago. The complaints from residents are coming from beyond the 2.5 mile radius, and other problems that they've identified. So to make the point, I think we're just trying to say we're gathering information on the impact of the landfill. Go ahead. And our perception is that talking to residents, that what is being reported or what people are really recognizing is only the tip of the iceberg. That what's happening is that social media, folks are not reporting. There's a lot more to the odor and the issues that we have that we really want to start to look at. So our committee, and we'll work with a broader committee for the January workshop with commissioners, is saying, well, what would make sense for metrics for our town to help us articulate how this landfill odor is impacting us. So for instance, is it practical to say, we know there'll be odors within the half mile, so let's not look there. Let's look at outside that radius, things like that. So those are the things that we want to have dialogue with Lake County and what would make sense. Look at having a more formal study of odors in the area, because we know that perhaps there's some that are not being registered. Like to look at the ways that we can get more standard reporting back to our residents, looking at the metrics. So these are just ideas that they have. I'll just wrap up real quickly here. Go ahead, Linda. And then the last step, and this is the fourth bullet, the odor form itself, I know in talking to the Wake County staff, they're looking at better ways to communicate about the form and responses. But there are other tools, and this is one that came to our attention that I know some folks are starting to download, is a free app that people have that already know where you're located, what time it is. So that was one of the things we had asked them from the beginning, was a much easier mobile app for us to report when we have odors, wherever we are, whether we're shopping or at school. So we still want to have those kind of discussions and ask the county commissioners to consider that. So that's what our committee is working on. We have not determined succinctly what we're going to say for the commissioners, but I think it's important for them to get up to speed that as much as the Wake County perspective about the landfill is something that Wake County needs for our residents in our town, for many of our neighborhoods, this is a pretty big problem. So that's what we'd like to articulate.
Okay. John, any additional comments?
Yeah, sure. I definitely concur with Councilwoman Kelly on the concern and how we chapter odor. That I think that's across the entire committee, certainly a common theme. The challenge obviously comes into, you know, what we communicate to our residents here and what our aspirations are from what we communicated last February as to how we articulate that with the county commissioners or our local municipalities that are party to the ILA that we are not a party to, that basically dictates the landfill, how long the landfill is in place, how long that agreement is in place, and how long the current contract with GFL is in place, which, by the way, both of those are in place until September of 2031. So another 10 and a half years until either one of those agreements go away or can be renegotiated. So I think that's something that we have to consider as we go about the long-term solution here. And I consider the long-term solution the next 10 years. What can we do in the intervening 10 years between now and 2031? Because for those who have looked at the long-term landfill use study, there is language in there that actually potentially compels this landfill to be in utilization much longer than expected, you know, beyond 2050, so more than another 30 years from now. So there is certainly discussion as to, you know, how that ILA is redone 10 years from now, you know, other options for the landfill 10 years from now when that contract is over. So how do we deal with that in the interim? And that's how do we work as good neighbors? And the positive thing is we've had some good conversations, not only as a full committee with GFL, but some one-on-one conversations with Mr. Robertson and with the new landfill leadership, both the local CEO or the regional CEO, regional director, who just all highlight a couple things that GFL has tried to do because of, you know, their understanding and their concern for the odor issue that we have in town, and we've articulated to them. Just this last summer, they spent an additional $2 million in additional equipment to help to make sure that they have dirt on top of, you know, the open working face every night, and that's part of their contract. So that's actually in the South Wake landfill contract with the county that they have to do that. So they had some equipment issues, and they saw that. They also had some, I'll just call it, and I think in their terms, they had some poor management at the landfill manager level, who was not working very well with Wake County in that back and forth relationship, and they replaced him. So they replaced that manager back in the early summer timeframe. The new manager was at our last meeting. He came and spoke to us. He is very attuned to having a landfill in a local municipality. He has actually operated one of those landfills prior, where in his words, he actually could stand on the top of the landfill and actually see and wave to the children on the playground in the school that was nearby. Not great, but he has lived in that type of environment, so he understands those concerns. So that's a good thing. That's a positive thing, that we have someone who understands how to operate in that environment. They are being proactive. Councilwoman Kelly mentioned Phase 2 Bravo, that they are opening up, and they've actually gone above and beyond in that design, and they presented that to us in this last landfill meeting that we had with them. They have gone well above and beyond of the environmental standards that are required for how to get rid of the water, how to pipe all of the seepage that comes out of a normal landfill. So it was encouraging to see that they did that, and that was an additional investment by GFL that was not required by them, either via EPA standards or by Wake County standards. They did that on their own. Again, from the environmental, and I think that's important for us to communicate with our citizens, that we really have to be careful about communicating whether this is an environmental issue or this is an odor issue. It's certainly an odor issue. I'm attuned to that. I smell it now, thanks to the cutting of the trees for 540. In Wood Creek, I get to smell the nice ripe smell that they talk about with the landfill on certain days. It certainly makes it all the way to our neighborhood, no doubt. So I'm certainly attuned to that. But they've gone again above and beyond, and they have quadrupled the amount of EPA monitoring and studying that has to be done with regard to any type of emitted toxic materials out of the landfill. So their requirement is much less stringent than they have placed upon themselves to make sure that there are no environmental issues with our landfill, which is great. That's a positive thing that they're doing that amount. For this slide that's still up here right now, we did have this discussion last time, and it's important to figure out, I think, jointly what we're trying to do with Wake County. The Smell My City, the reason that it won't work with them, as we discussed this last time with them, is they're using EnviroSuite to try and get that track back model. And right now, unfortunately, EnviroSuite doesn't work with this. So maybe somebody who's a cool software app coder could help that out. But again, what they're trying to do is get a cause and effect, right? So we tell them, here's the odor, and they can go back and collect that data and model it so that we can get to this metric data down the road, to go, okay, what is the causality? Is it truly the weather? Do we need to maintain different operating times of the landfill? Because the theme here is obviously for the next 10 years is, how do we coexist before we have an opportunity to do something different potentially with this landfill? So how best do we do that coexist? So I certainly understand that. Certainly empathize with folks that are frustrated with this. The good part is, I think we've got a reasonable partner right now in GFL and their leadership, and in the Wake County leadership that's trying to address this, to include how do we come up with metrics that are meaningful from an odor perspective, and how do we track them back, and how do we establish the causality of that, and how do you apply effort and potentially monetary towards that. And interestingly enough, if you look at the actual contract with GFL, the odor control is actually in 10.21 of that contract. The responsibility is actually borne by the county for odor control. It's not borne by GFL. So this is a discussion that we have to continue to have with the county commissioners and educate the new commissioners that have come on as to this concern. But we've got 6 folks that we have to convince of the issues here, and obviously if any change were to happen with the ILA, we have 11 other municipalities, so a lot of different legislators that have to be convinced that this is something worth them reaching or broaching out of that ILA in the short or long term. So significantly, we've got some work to continue to do. I think it sounds like we've got potential forward progress with the commissioners willing to look at what are reasonable metrics for odor. But then the next step after that is, even if we broach that reasonable odor, what is the real remedy? Unfortunately, in the current contract with GFL, there is no way to breach that contract for cause. The only way to breach that contract is by actual breach of contract, i.e. default. them basically walking away and not performing there is the way that the contract is written out of 16.1. So all good discussion. I'm glad we're continuing on this. Glad to have those continuing conversations. I'm glad that GFL is happy to be part of our conversations, and Wake County, the staff has been happy to be part of the conversations with us. Try and establish that. We've got to continue to try and make sure we have a good joint message from the town as we address not only the commissioners, but the broader municipalities around us. And Councilwoman Kelly and I will continue to try and do that so that we can make sure that whatever comes from us is a message from the town, not individuals sitting here on the council.
Appreciate your efforts, both of you and the committee. We also continue to talk to county commissioner, staff, very recently, matter of fact. And if nothing else, the only good news I think I can come up with right now, besides thanking you for your efforts, is by golly, we got their attention. At least we got their attention. We didn't have that attention up until maybe 6 or 8 months ago, or maybe a year. So I think we're on the right track, and things are starting to happen. And as I say, we can, all of us, do the same thing. Continue to talk, get there. Any other comments or questions about what's been said so far on the landfill?
Yeah, when I proposed this committee, and then we discussed it as a council, I envisioned it as a way to connect, or to act as a facilitator to connect our residents to our commissioners. And that has been completely sideswiped by COVID, right? We can't get them in front of residents, and residents can't get in front of them. It was a way to educate, like you both did tonight, and that is really helpful to those who are watching. But it's another thing that has been completely usurped by everything that COVID has swamped over, right? So in those two goals, they haven't been met by no fault of anybody's here. Another goal was to make sure that as a council and as a town, we're representing a unified voice and message to the commissioner. And my initial fear when we had the split of subcommittees in different paths was that we wouldn't get that unified voice. And now we have 2 new commissioners who really need that unified voice. Do we have at least a consistent message? Randy loves his bullet points. Do we have those bullet points we're going to bring to these people and say, these are the action items, this is what we're looking for?
I from the committee that I'm on, I think there's a little bit of a gap because we want to educate how bad the problem is. And I think that's one thing that was missing with some of the Wake County staff. Because they're looking at, I mean, they're doing their job. They're looking at the big picture. They're meeting the minimum EPA standards. They're doing their job. We're asking whose job is it to make sure that the odor issues that are pretty big in Holly Springs now, whose job is it to really do something about that? And that to me is still an unknown. And if there's metrics, and if they cannot meet the metrics for it to show that it's acceptable for what anybody would think is acceptable in their town. Like if you're outside and once a week the smell is so bad you can't go outside your house, is that acceptable or not? Even though they can. What is the solution? Because saying, well, you're gonna have to wait for 10 years, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. And I don't know what the alternatives are. And to me, there's always something that could be done. It might cost money. I mean, we spent a lot of money on a wastewater treatment plant that we didn't want to spend, but we spent it because it cost money. Those are things I want us to be talking about. So I think that is where I was hoping that the council help us direct us there, because I think we share a lot of the same goals and ideas between Commissioner Graff and I, but at the end, what is it that we want to say? And to me, the resolution spoke about pushing for some of these topics to be discussed. And that's why, like I said, this committee pulled out 2, because it's a lot of work. And so we're meeting and doing some good work, but is that okay that even if the smell is we can't tolerate it, that we're gonna have to put up with it for 10 years? I mean, I want to ask the commissioners that, because I'd like to, it's for them to solve it. I don't want to just assume that we're nothing's gonna be done. I want to push harder than that. I want to make it where they have to solve this problem.
Yeah, the Mayor Pro Tem Barry and I had our legislative agenda committee meeting a couple weeks ago, and one thing we discussed was, as a town, we don't have money. Wake County has limited money. The state and the federal government have much more. And as we continue these discussions, are there specific things that we can ask for as a town related to the landfill? I don't know the answer to that question. None of us do. Wake County and GFL might, but there's probably no quick, easy, or most of all, cheap solutions to this problem. So it's going to take partnerships at probably more than a county, private, and town level. So that's certainly something I'd be interested in. The other question, and I just want to make sure, because we're nearing the year mark, and this is a new committee, and we don't want a big and bloated government. So we want to, make sure that we're using our staff and our personal resources efficiently. One of the things I always love is you've watched the original Indiana Jones and you realize if Indiana Jones wasn't in the movie, it would have ended the exact same way. So we have these benchmarks that have been met, these new initiatives that have been started. Do you think that the committee is making a measurable impact towards these benchmarks? Or were these things that were going to happen? Is the work you guys doing, do you think it's worthwhile? Is it worthwhile to keep pushing on these things? Have you seen movement?
I think to the mayor's point, we are getting more attention than we had before. And I think the opportunity, because I don't have the solution. And I think it is unrealistic to think that the landfill will be closed anytime soon. However, there's a big thing between doing nothing and seeing what happens with what's going on with Lake County GFL and the landfill finally being closed. What's in between that if the odor problems are still really bad? For instance, I believe one of the commissioners mentioned maybe we should look at restaurant waste and start to ship some of the really bad waste. And I think they said that restaurant waste sits for days on end. It's pretty bad. Maybe some of that could start to be taken somewhere else. And it would have a cost to the different municipalities. Maybe it's cut into their joint revenue. So though it's like brainstorming. And again, I think that's the Wake County and GFL to figure out. We can raise up where the issues are, I think, for them to know. I think it's our opportunity and our duty to let them know how bad it is, because that is not something I think they're here. But I feel like that is one of the measures for this committee, these people, that's what we're working on. How did we get here? I think knowing the history is important. And how bad is it and what are you going to do? That's kind of what the goal of this committee is saying.
You might remember when we were in Raleigh with the last meeting I think we had with the landfill in Raleigh. I think with Matt Calibria, and we had a very recent talk like today. Matt Calibria, I give him a lot of credit. He came up with the comment, you might remember. If you don't, please support this, especially with him, a timeline. The first we've heard of that, we need a timeline. We talked about that again today.
Yeah.
And I think if we all support that as a very big piece of this action, doesn't solve all the problems, but at least puts you don't have a timeline. Come there ahead. 30 minutes or 30 years, 20 years, that's not a timeline. I think if we can all get together and all of us support Matt's concept of, okay, what is that timeline? What can we do? We think that's a great idea. And if so, on that timeline, what are the options at the end of that timeline? And I think that's, again, a positive step in the right direction. Again, no guarantees, but I think that's a very important point to all get together and promote. Let's have a timeline.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, that's been a consistent theme with Commissioner Calabria, and with Commissioner Hutchinson. The same thing. Is that's why trying to get that metric that we talked about. What is a reasonable metric that can be established, and then what's the timeline to assess that metric? So this is the challenge of metrics. You actually have to have time progress, and so I know that there'll be people that'll be frustrated with that, but you actually have to measure metrics over a period of time and see which way the trend is going. So totally agree with that, but that's where we have to get to and figure out what that timeline is. But at the end of the day, 6 individuals that need to be compelled for change from our perspective are the commissioners. I mean, this sits squarely in their lap as far as making a decision as to what gets done. And their hands are tied to some extent, not only by the GFL contract, but that ILA as to what they might be able to do. So when you talk about being able to shift waste from a different or to a different location, that's actually prohibited in the current ILA because it compels all municipalities to put all of their trash in this landfill. So, and the ILA says that unless it's done through legal legislation to void one portion of that, the remainder of the ILA remains in place. So again, had this discussion with Commissioner Calabria of the challenges that are there between those 2 documents that we face. So again, having that metrics, having the timeline, again, compels that discussion to figure out if there are additional options, which really comes down to, are the other 11 municipalities willing to spend the money to help us resolve the odor mitigation when we're not party, unfortunately, to that ILA. So we've got to convince not only 6 commissioners, but we've got to convince 11 other legislative bodies that they go spend money out of their budget, to help us out. So it's a tough lift. It really is. And I think the first lift, and I think we're in violent agreement that, you got to keep pushing to get those metrics and get them collected. What are we measuring them for? How are we measuring them? And what are we going to work towards for a timeline for the next assessment of, can we compel the commissioners and 11 other legislations to do something different, whether that's, creative ideas, doing an incinerator, doing other things that have been done in landfills that are in other major municipalities around the country. We're not the only one. So, there are other people that have good ideas because their landfills are right there. Just as Commissioner Hutchison reminded me, the North Wake landfill before it closed down was a half a mile from his house. So he obviously dealt with it personally as well, up on the north side of Raleigh. So that's important. I know we did mention one thing. It was interesting, Christine. I'm glad you brought it up. That the litter issue, because looking through the GFL contract in section 12.8, litter control within a half a mile is squarely on GFL's responsibility. So that's something I think we could go back to GFL management and discuss with them. So I'll definitely take that one on to see what we can talk to John about
I think,
how Wake County can help us. So.
Mayor, to me, it's metrics over anything else. What are the metrics that the town and our residents would think are reasonable that we could then start to build them? Because right now there aren't really any. So what are the metrics so that the folks in the different rings can think are acceptable? I think that's really what the work needs to be. And to your question, we understand as a group of subcommittee, we don't know where this work's going to go, but these folks have been wanting to do this work anyway because it's just so frustrating. So we don't know where it's going to go, but it's work that they're willing to take.
And I think you guys are going to have a great opportunity once the vaccine is out and everybody can meet in person again. And I think we're just going to be a lot more efficient. Have either of you guys talked with other municipal representatives in regards to the ILA in any capacity? I remember a while ago, I had a discussion with a counterpart in another Wake County municipality, and they didn't even know it existed. And they asked their budget guy, and he was like, "Oh, yeah, I think I might know something about that." And he had to go digging and found 50,000 here. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I didn't even realize it was there."
We're not that far. And I said, our committee focused on 2 points. There were other points on there. There was a 6-point communication to our resolution. So we should look at all of that. We just haven't.
And I'm glad you brought that up because it's an interesting part in the landfill study that came out a couple months ago, was published. So if you look at the average tipping fees around North Carolina, and this is clearly articulated in that landfill contract, that Wake County has the ability to baseline those tipping fees towards the state average. we are well below, Wake County is well below the state average for tipping fees. And when you account for the ILA, the 11 municipalities are extremely below the tipping fees that other people pay around North Carolina. So again, broader issue, probably not a popular one for those others, because these other 11 municipalities are literally either the lowest or the second lowest tipping fee that they pay per capita in the entire state. So yes, I mean, but there is some room there as far as money being allocated towards odor control and management of the landfill. And to your broader point, I think not only talking about municipalities, but this goes back to that broader discussion about leadership and trust, right? If we've got to be able to articulate and communicate what do other communities, and when we talk about what we think is reasonable or acceptable in Holly Springs, what's reasonable, acceptable in other large municipalities that have a landfill near them? Are there any other established standards? I don't know. We don't have that yet. So, but that would be very good information to know, to then articulate again to our potential residents to go, this is the data that's out there. I mean, good, bad, or indifferent, it's a departure point to start that discussion from, to go, are these reasonable metrics or not? Or are we being overly stringent or less stringent, whichever way it happens to be, on Wake County with regards to their requirement to manage odor control for this content? So I think that's important that we talk about all these discussions and we have these debates, that we come to the discussion with, facts, if you will, and not all of us are going to believe that the same facts are the same facts on the side, but that's why we have these discussions. So to kind of get to where that middle ground really is. And I think that goes back to the earlier discussion we were having about, ordinance and not for the mask. We've got to have those discussions and get all the facts out there, which again, is I believe, half the reason that people don't believe them right now, because they're hearing one side as they see it. They're not hearing the other side. They're not hearing that debate. They're not seeing their leadership. They're not trusting their leadership because they're not hearing that cogent debate and arguable facts. They're just hearing, here's what I feel about it. Okay, well, that's what you feel, but let's talk about the metric, my perspective, which gets back to the metric. So
I think to put this in summary for the time being, and I say for the time being because we moved here in 1995. That year we marched against the dump before it was here. It's 95. We're a bit beyond that point in time right now. And I still have to say, for the first time in probably the last 2 or 3 years, I see something happening that, and you guys are part of this. I see something happening that is a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. I just hope it's not a train. But the timeline and getting the commissioners on our side and getting the county manager on our side and the county assistant manager on our side, progress is our most important product in GE. So anyway, we could talk about this all night, and probably we should, but it's a long-term process. It's a long-term process.
since we haven't heard anything from other two council members, is there anything different that we want to change for Vector going forward with this? I mean, I know Wolf was kind of alluding to that a little bit, but is there something we think as a body we need to do differently?
I think I couldn't agree more with Councilman Wolf's comments about the unified approach of the committee, and the committee's intent was to be a conduit for the council and a conduit for our residents back to the county commissioners and back to the county staff to advocate for odor mitigation, a comprehensive landfill plan, investments into the facility to continue odor mitigation efforts, gas well expansions and those things. And I think, as the mayor's pointed out adequately, we've gotten ourselves into a better position now than we were. And I think they're listening, and we need to double down on those efforts and really make sure that the county commissioners, the people that need to hear this, are aware of what we face and are engaged in these issues. I'm a little concerned with with what's transpired here a little bit tonight. We spent 2 meetings, the last 2 business meetings that we had, we went through and appointed members to a CTP stakeholder committee. We appoint Board of Adjustment members, Planning Board members, Parks and Recreation Advisory Board members, Tree Advisory Board members as a group every year. And now this is the first time that I'm hearing we have subcommittees that are going in two different directions from that unified vision or that unified approach. And they seem to be unilaterally handpicked to move in different directions. And I'm a little concerned at if we have the right direction on the committee and what we're doing and why people were formed in subcommittees and why we're going down that road if it never came back in front of this board for a formal approval or appointment of those people that are on that committee. So I'm a little concerned about how that's transpired and why it's taken a year for a formal discussion on those efforts. I think, as Councilwoman Kelly said, the resolution provides good guide to what we want to achieve, and that was something that was unanimously passed by this board and should be used as a guide for how the committee does its work. But I'm concerned that there's two different paths and two different opinions on the direction we need to go into. And I think it's in our best interest as a council to look at this and make sure that the objectives we want to outline, have this committee work on, are identified and are being actively reviewed. Because if not, we're going to go in different directions, and then it's not going to be that good relationship with the county. People are going to be wondering why one side's asking for one thing and the other side's doing something completely different. But one thing that stood out to me is, Councilman McGrath made a comment about the slides that he hadn't seen before he got here, and he's a member of the committee that was a formal, the formal appointed committee. That doesn't tell me there's a good team effort here, so I'm a little concerned that we're operating in the same direction, that Rudder's going the right way. And in the conversations I've had, I've gotten that feedback. So I want to make sure that you're hearing what you need to hear from us to get that direction and really operate on those objectives effectively. And if not, then maybe we need to have more discussion on what those objectives need to be if we need to double down on that resolution. But I think this is a good effort. It's very important for our residents, and the work we're doing is time well spent on this. So I don't mind spending time now or whether it's a month from now to keep talking about it. But we need to make sure we're operating in the best interest of our residents. We're not misinforming people, and we're setting realistic, objective goals that can be met in action with our commissioners and with their staff.
Thank you. Wrapping it up, anybody else?
Yeah, I'm not going to add much more to this, but I thank you guys for the work that you're doing, and I know it's not easy during this time. COVID has not slowed down the landfill and its odors, so we can't really slow down either. And it's important for us to gather those metrics, as you say, regarding odors and how they're spreading throughout town and its pervasiveness now further out. But also, we need to really stick to a timeline so that we're not letting COVID and other external factors prevent us from tackling this problem sooner than later. But yeah, I appreciate the hard work that you guys are doing on this. I know it's not easy, and especially during this time.
In responding, I agree. That's why I wanted us to talk before the county commissioners met in January, because I do want some guidance. I do think that what message do we want to say that's united? I need some help there. Because the folks that I'm talking to, and most of them are actually on the major committee, we don't want to go in and say, okay, there's nothing we can do, we have to wait till you. That's not the tone. That might be the reality, but that's not the tone we want to start with. And I think what we focus on is how bad is this problem, and how do we make sure that we raise that concern. That's really what we've been working on. It's just been with COVID impacted the committee as a whole meeting. We just can't meet that much, or haven't met that much, and we're just doing a lot of work in meetings. But you're right. I mean, I think we are missing that phone call. I need your help.
So let me put my point to answer your question. Where I think we diverted and the subcommittee came on was that very discussion. Are we after trying to make measurable change? What are we trying to do? And Councilman Wolf basically pointed that out, that we were trying to get more engagement, right? And we're trying to get more education. Those were the two goals that I kind of came away from last February's proclamation. So not only educating our own community, but educating the commissioners, and then engaging not only our community, but the commissioners on the scope of the problem and getting a path forward. So I guess where the disconnect is, and where the difference in here is, are we going to go to the commissioners and say, we need to close the landfill today? Or are we going to go, let's establish metrics and timeline, as we've already discussed tonight? And if we broach those metrics, what's the next step at that point? That's not necessarily a closure of the landfill. That's potentially, like I said, there's multiple options, whether that's an incinerator. What are the next steps that happen at that point? And again, that's not necessarily out of our control. It is completely out of our control fiscally and legislatively. It's not necessarily out of our control from an influence perspective. So that's, I think, where we are different a little bit from our approaches, because right now, thankfully, we have had a rapid shift in the engagement from the GFL on the county side, which is positive, with an acknowledgement, as they put it, to coexist. We've got to learn how to coexist, and in that coexist, we've got to learn how to deal with and mitigate the odor, which thankfully they put out the odor mitigation plan, which again doesn't have a specific metric put to it, which is where our influence and education, I think, comes into play with the commissioners to help move that forward and then move the ball forward. So again, that's the disparity, if you will, I think, between the broader group of the landfill committee and where Councilman Kelly has tried to have some discussions with other folks, I think, between the two. And I'll let her.
I would say the statement you said, we're in total agreement. I think we have to ask the commissioners to come up with some sort of resolution solution to make it better for our residents. And we've not said that it means they have to close the landfill. It's just saying we don't have to also say that we have to let the contract play out and there's nothing we can do in between.
Oh, no.
So on that higher level, we're aligned. I think the difference is that Councilman McGrath's been looking with the operation, working with GFL, which are a couple of the points. We're taking a couple of other ones. The committee is not looking at them all. But I think the important message that we could be aligned is saying, commissioners, we have a big problem. How can we measure it so you can be convinced it's a big problem? And what are you going to do about it if we prove that it is a big problem? I mean, that's really what we're trying to say.
I think we're all on the
So
same.
at that point, we're at the same point. It's just a matter of providing some of that input to show that. And from the Wake County staff, they look at it as a Wake County plan. They're not focused from this perspective of showing the pain for Holly Springs. And that's what really we've been doing. And I think could be massage, but I think that's really the point, is that it's really that bad. The commissioners did not know that. And if it's that bad, what are you going to do about it? That's really what we're asking.
I think the bottom line to this, and part of the bottom line is, like I said, 1995 to today, there's a lot of line, is that I even heard this very recently from Matt Calabria. What I think we have to do with them, on top of everything else we're doing, but there's nothing wrong with what we're doing, I don't think, is if there is a timeline, we can come up with a date on that timeline with them. At the end of that timeline, what are the options that we all have? We've talked about that. I haven't got anything specific to tell you about it, but it was at that point in time, do we close the landfill? Do we ship goods out of Holly Springs to Sampson County? Do we do the burn unit? Do we do whatever? And that's getting close. Relatively speaking, to 1995, it's getting close. I think that's a big thing to work with collectively from all our parts. And I think, we can go on forever on this, but it is a very challenging subject, to say the least.
I think that's the biggest thing for me, Mayor. I mean, is the challenge what I think I've seen, and that's why I go back, and I'm not trying to say the ILA and the contract are completely limiting, but to try and educate and articulate the amount of lift that's required to actually get there. So that's the challenge that we face, and make sure that not only our local citizens are educated about that. Not to say it's insurmountable, but it's a heavy lift. I mean, it's a lot of influence that has to be done. And that's a heavy lift, that you've got to influence a lot of commissioners and a lot of legislators to actually get measurable change that, some of the folks in our community now believe that, we can just close the landfill, as you mentioned. Yeah, that's a hard lift right now. So that's all we're trying to, trying to articulate. So what do we do in the intervening time to make that happen. I think that's where we're all aligned right now, to go, how do we get there? I think, what we've just stated, not to restate it, but how do we get there? To go to where the metrics are and to go, okay, if then else, what happens and what is the lift that's required if we get to that date in time, like the mayor mentioned, that the metrics are busted, they're not being met. What happens then? How are the commissioners going to influence the other 11 municipalities to go along with either spending a ton of money or dissolving the contract, dissolving the ILA, all those things? So those are tough discussions. They really are.
Right, and I think our role is to make sure that the impact, the negative impact that it's doing to Holly Springs businesses and residents are well articulated, so then you can help with the lift.
May I make a suggestion, maybe from a lawyer's perspective?
Of course.
The contract with the county requires the operator to use good industry practice, and that is defined as those means, methods, techniques, standards, if unemployed, that are accepted as good operation, maintenance, repair, replacement, management practice in the landfill industry as observed in the southeast region of the United States. So you all could, if you chose to, hire a consultant to find out if what they're doing meets that definition. You may find that it does. You might find that it doesn't. The industry standard in the southeast region of the United States may be that there's a enclosed facility like what we did with our wastewater treatment plant, spent $5 million to enclose a particular, the smelly portion of it, for a time, and then it's processed out that way. I'm just guessing, but there's probably a consultant that you all could hire to get that information.
Counselor?
The danger is, if the consultant firm comes back and says, yeah, they're doing everything right, then you're back.
Counselor, I like your line of thinking. The only difference I would say is I would like to compel the commissioners to do that study, not us, because their responsibility via 1021 is odor control. That's the responsibility of the county to make sure that they're doing everything. So
It's on the company to do general odor control. The county takes gas odor, landfill gas.
Right.
So the GFL is the one to do it, but nobody is, if you're hiring me to be the best lawyer that you can, I'm not going to hire another lawyer to tell you that I'm the best lawyer. That's up to you. If you don't think I'm the best lawyer, you have to hire another one. So I don't think the GFL is going to, if they hire the person.
Well, no, I'm not saying GFL. I'm saying Wake County.
Yeah.
Because this is, we're trying to articulate this as a county problem, right? That's our influence and engagement here, is trying to articulate this as a county level problem. That's impacting Holly Springs, but it goes across the entire county, the 12 municipalities, the 11 plus us.
And this issue about hiring a consultant, and thank you, Counselor, because I love it when you have a bunch of nails and somebody provides you a hammer, and that's kind of what you did. So that sounds like a good option to put at the end of a potential timeline, right? We're not going to close at the end of the timeline. This is the next step. And Councilwoman Kelly asked for guidance, and I would say there's two parallel discussions. There's the short and the long term, and I think we can all agree that a timeline and metrics are the long-term path. And that's the path to be measured, reasonable, and continue long-term productive discussions. Short-term odor mitigation, in my opinion, is the time to be unreasonable and ask for the moon and demand things and just continue pushing hard on those conversations. So if we're looking for guidance, that's my personal view.
Okay, are we good to go on at this point? This is a never-ending discussion, and it hasn't been since I said.
It will be till the smoke
And
stops.
we could be here with the COTS and we're still talking, and it's all good. But I think we got it to a point tonight where I think we got a good understanding of what's going on. And I really think that part of the answer to this happens to be two people that I know we've already mentioned. It's Matt Calabria and Steve Hutchison are probably very good starters on keeping going with this process. And I do know that Aaron and I, along with Randy, have talked about the landfill. Where the state may come in, we don't know. I don't know. But at least Aaron is on the team of, I understand the problem. We designed the problem pretty well. Now the solution is the hard part. But anyway, enough of that. Anything else? Right. Let's go to, let's see, what's next? Manager's report, as I recall.
Great. Thank you, Mayor and members of council. One thing maybe to add to that last agenda topic. The council is in the process of working on your legislative priorities. And within that, there are some engagements that you may want to have at the state level, maybe at the county level, and maybe at the federal level. And based off some of the conversation here tonight, there may be an opportunity to weave in some components as it relates to the county level, in particular around the landfill. You are coming up on roughly a year of having passed your resolution. And I think, the intent of that resolution was to build momentum, and you have built momentum. And I give the mayor and the council a lot of credit for the work that you've been doing. And of course, our two council members who've been leading some of the other additional efforts. You've built a lot of momentum, and there's a lot more to go. I think everybody articulated, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but kind of where we'd like to be in the longer term from an overall odor mitigation. But and I want to recognize my counterpart, David Ellis at the county. I know he recognizes it, and he's been a good partner in this process as well. But that county piece might be a piece we can weave into this in that conversation. It's up to me. I have 3 items tonight, Mayor and Council. The first one is a reminder that tomorrow evening we have the Parks and Recreation Master Plan virtual session, and that's from 6:30 to 8 p.m. Via Zoom. The public can go to the town's website and go to the calendar and then locate the link for that particular meeting. But we'd love to have the communities and continued engagement on that process. We're getting great feedback and nearing toward the kind of the final efforts, if you want to call it, toward the back half of that particular effort. The one other reminder, or we've had a conversation among the council at your last workshop, but for the public, that due to the COVID, the elevating COVID cases here in the area, in January, the mayor and council are going to be going to a council meetings where it's just the mayor and council in the chamber, and the public will not be allowed in the chamber. However, we want to encourage and direct the public to, again, use the Zoom links that are in our calendar to follow and monitor. And of course, we'll continue with the same way that we've been receiving public comment, and we will make sure that that always gets to you so you know what residents have on their minds. We'll be doing that for the month of January. The last item, I do want to echo a couple of the comments the council members made around the holiday events. I want to recognize a couple of staff members in particular. We had Tamara Ward, who coordinated many of our efforts, particularly out at the Ting Stadium and with the trees. She and the team with Parks and Rec and many other members around our organization really did a great job. I want to recognize her and thank her for that. And we got some good feedback, I know, from some of you around that event. And so I appreciate that feedback and welcome any additional comments around that and other activities. I also want to recognize Chief Smith for the outstanding work on with the Santa. Somehow he has a direct line to North Pole. I don't know how he got Santa's direct line, but he has it somehow. A great relationship with Santa, and we're able to have him come down here and participate in our community. So we're really grateful for that, and Chief Smith and the whole entire fire department. So thank you for that. And with that, happy holidays. You have a safe holiday.
Thank you as well. Counselor, closed session.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. The Economic Development Director would like to consult you on a few economic development projects. So if you could go into executive session between 143 and 11A subsection 4. If we could have a motion to that regard.
So moved, Counselor.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded, all in favor.
Aye.
Opposed? Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.